So welcome everyone to our online port event. I'm Terry. I work in the community and member participation team at our co-op, working hard with my team to bring you, our members, closer to the business that you own and the products that you love. Tonight's event is being recorded for those who can't make it, so if you prefer not to appear on the recording, you can always leave your camera off. We'll also be sure to share the recording with you afterwards in case you want to watch any of it back yourself. So tonight we're joined by Ellie Pinfield, one of our co-op wine buyers, Sophia Evans, one of our co-op cheese buyers. We also have Simon Prestige Jones and Lisa O'Donnell from Taylor's, the supplier of the ports for tonight, and Joao Vasconcelos, who will be joining us live from Porto, just off the Douro River in Portugal. Also in the background and supporting in the chat, we've got Sarah Benson, another one of our co-op wine buyers. So the running order for tonight is Ellie's going to start us off with a quick introduction to port at co-op. We'll then bring in Joao to talk a bit more about these port wines, where they come from, how they're made. Then it's on to the port tasting, led by Ellie, Joao, and Sophia, who's going to be taking us through some delicious cheese pairings for these ports. But don't worry if you've not got a bottle yourself. There'll still be loads of interesting things that we'll be covering. Following this, we'll go into the Q&A, which is your chance to ask these experts anything you hear about tonight, or port or cheese related in general. As we go through the event, feel free to drop your questions into the chat. We'll be sure to pick them up and I'll ask them on your behalf later on. When we do get to the Q&A, you'll also be invited to come off mute and ask your questions yourself if you prefer by using the hands up function on Teams. Now, the hands up function on Teams is in a different place depending on what device and what browser you're using, but it should be easily enough to spot. It's like a little hand. Any problems finding it, let us know in the chat and we'll do our best to help. We'll end the event with a couple of quick fire questions for 2 lucky members on the call to win some fantastic prizes, which Ellie will cover in a second. So make sure that you're paying attention. We are hoping to be done by 8 o'clock, but if we've still got some questions to get through and people are happy to hang around, we may stick on for a bit longer. I will now hand over to Ellie.
Thanks, Terry. Thank you very much all for joining us. It's really nice that you've given up your Thursday to join us and learn a little bit more about port. And I'm really delighted that we're joined by Taylor's, who's one of our fabulous wine suppliers. So they supply our own label port as well as some of our branded Taylor's port. So as Terry said, my name's Ellie. I am lucky enough to work in the co-op wine team, and I'm very lucky to look after the fortified category. So tonight we're going to be covering a couple of different products. So we've got our Taylor's, I don't know if you can see it, Taylor's Select Reserve, and we've also got our co-op 10-year-old Tawny port. So we'll be trying both of those later this evening. Simon, Lisa, and Joao are all here and ready and raring to take all of your questions and your queries, and I'm sure they'll introduce themselves properly in a minute. But they are very passionate, very experienced, very knowledgeable. So please give all of your most tricky questions to them, and I will answer all of the easy ones. I'm also very pleased for the first time that we're pairing food and wine. So I'm joined by my friend and colleague Sophia, who is our cheese buyer, which I think is possibly one of the most envy-inducing jobs at the co-op. She is a big cheese fan.
I am a big cheese fan, and I am really excited to be here. It is the first time that we've actually included cheese on this, so very excited to be able to share a little bit about cheese pairings.
And she's going to be setting you up for success with your Christmas cheese boards, so watch this space. So by way of a very brief introduction, because I will leave it to the professionals to introduce it properly, the clue is in the name with this one. So port is from Portugal. More specifically the Douro region, which is a very, very beautiful region, which, as I'm sure you'll see from the photos in a few minutes, it's a very famous wine region. It's very historic. It's got a lot of culture and history around the winemaking process, which I'm sure Taylor's will kind of give you a bit of a brief overview on. It's actually a particularly special area because it's one of only 7 UNESCO World Heritage Sites for wine specifically, and it's been recognised for the kind of the exceptional culture and the wine and the importance of the wine in that region to the people and the local economy around that region. So it's incredibly steep, it's incredibly slopey, terraced, unique soils, unique climate. I think it's 80 different grapes, 80 plus grapes. So it's a really unique region, and one that I'm hoping is going to be really interesting to learn about. So As Terry said, please do fire your questions into the chat, and we'll answer them throughout the session. He also alluded to a lovely prize, which has been very kindly donated by Taylor's and one of our cheese suppliers. So we've got 2 lucky winners who will take home a bottle of, a Magnum, a very large Christmas-sized bottle of our late bottled vintage port and a lovely cheese board. So keep an ear out, because there will be a small quiz at the end. So make sure you're listening. So without further ado, I will hand over to João, Simon and Lisa to take you through a little bit more about Taylor's and port at the Co-op.
Hello, everyone. So my name is João. I'm based in Porto. Greetings from Porto, which is the city that gives its name, as we will see, to the category. So in Portuguese, Vinho do Porto, wine from Porto. And I'll take you through the wonders of one of the world's most historical, most famous wine regions, and also one of the most historical and long-lasting food pairings that we can think of. So as all of you know, today is very trendy for wine producers to talk a lot about food pairings with their wines. Actually, we could argue that the oldest food and wine pairing that exists is probably port and cheese, and it has been around for many centuries, and for one single reason, because it's actually a fantastic pairing. Okay, so I'll take you through. So next slide, please. So the Douro region is in the northeast of Portugal. Okay, so in Porto, where I am, I'm about 100 kilometers away from the beginning of the region. And then the region itself is a further 100 kilometers to Spain. So you can see that Portugal is quite small. We only have 200 kilometers between the ocean and our neighbors, Spain. Where I am, Porto, it's quite an Atlantic climate city. So we get quite a lot of rain. The temperature in the summer is never very high. The climate is very moderate. But actually, the Douro is a continental Mediterranean climate region, which means the summers are very hot and the winters are cold. The reason why we can have this different climate so close to Porto is because between the left side of the country, the western part of the northern part of Portugal, and the eastern part, there is a range of mountains, very high mountains, that basically divide the climate. All the rain from the Atlantic falls in these mountains, and then it creates a very hot and very dry region, the Douro. So in the Douro, we won't have a lot of rain. The summers are extremely hot, as I will mention, and that is absolutely fundamental to create the style of wine that we have. Next slide, please. So this picture is a picture from our most famous vineyard, that's Quinta de Vargelos from Taylor's, and it immediately shows you many of the key aspects of the Douro. First one, it's a mountain vineyard region. So we are mountain farmers. The altitude variation between the river level and the top of the hills is about 400-500 meters, very steep. And that obliges us to plant our vineyards in terraces. So not only because it's very steep, but also because we don't have a lot of rain. And so the terraces enable us to preserve the rain water when it does rain. And so the water goes straight underground, and it also helps us to preserve the soil. Otherwise, if we wouldn't have the terraces, all that soil and water would be washed down to the river. But we still lose a lot of soil. There's a lot of erosion still with the terraces. And that's also why the river is called, the river and the region, it's called Douro. Douro in Portuguese means made of gold. It's the golden river. The river gives its name to the region, the wine region. And the river, it's called the Golden River because of the soil that still falls into it and changes its color when it starts raining. But so this is one picture. But what's remarkable about the Douro is that the Douro, as I told you already, is about 100 kilometers long. And it's 100 kilometers of terraces all around, which is quite impressive. And it's one of the key aspects why the Douro is declared a World Heritage UNESCO. Next slide, please. This is another picture of Vargelas. So you can see the altitude variation. You can also see the proportion of terraces that we have in our vineyards. Okay, and this is actually a picture of one of the world's most famous vineyards, Vargelas, that Taylor's bought. The family bought back in 1886. Is considered very often as one of the most famous, highest quality vineyards in the world. Okay, so it's where our key premium wines mostly come from. Next slide, please. So one of the other famous aspects about the Douro, being a mountain vineyard, is that we don't really have any machine to pick our grapes. So all the grapes that we use to make our ports are hand-picked. Okay, from our point of view, this is quite difficult to manage and very expensive. But from a consumer point of view, so for those of us who love port, it's actually great news. Why? Because when we are picking the grapes, we can select the best grapes. If there are grapes that we think are not suitable to produce the highest quality port, we basically reject it. Those grapes will not come to the winery. Okay. So if you go back about 100 years, you would see women picking grapes into these big baskets that would take about 80 kilos, and men would carry the baskets in their backs to the winery. That was the procedure throughout the day. Okay. Nowadays, we obviously use tractors to take these new boxes. These boxes you see in the picture only take about 25 kilos. These are loaded into tractors. The tractor takes the grapes to the winery. So nowadays, even though in this picture we don't see the men for some reason, nowadays men and women should pick the grapes. And during the day, that's what happens between 7 o'clock in the morning. We tend to start early because of how hot it can be during the harvest. And we finish picking by 5 o'clock. The reason why we then we stop at 5 is because then we need to do something else. Next slide, please. The treading. Another very famous aspect about producing port. So port has traditionally been made by foot treading. Okay, there are a lot of reasons for it. The most important one is that when we produce port, so we pick the grapes, we fill one of these tanks during the day with grapes. At 5 o'clock, we have a full tank. We stop picking. People have dinner, and then after dinner, they will come to the tank, which we call in Portuguese lagar, and they will tread for 4 hours, non-stop, every night for a full month. Okay, it's very hard work. And the reason why we've used foot treading throughout history, and we still continue to do, it's because when you have feet crushing the grapes, the skins of the grapes against granite, you can extract a lot of color, a lot of flavor. All the color, all the flavor of a wine is in the skins. And so we need to extract a lot when we're producing port. The reason why we need to extract a lot is that when the fermentation then starts, so the sugars from the grapes start being transformed into alcohol like any other wine in the world, for port, we will actually stop that process halfway through it. After 3 days, we will stop it by adding brandy. So completely neutral, 77% proof brandy. And basically port is made. Port is made in 3 days. And that's why we need a very significant extraction method. And that's where foot treading is a fantastic method to produce port. By the way, this picture would be the same you would see in a winery in Rome 2,000 years ago. This is exactly the same way Romans were making wine 2,000 years ago, okay? Nowadays, we only produce our top quality wines, mostly vintage ports, the older Tawnies by foot treading. The main reason is that obviously today is very hard to find people to tread as much as we would need if we were producing all our port by foot treading. Next slide, please. So in reality, most of our port nowadays is actually produced by very modern, high technology techniques, such as this one, which is ours, which is basically a plunger tank. You have these blades that keep going down and crushing the skins and the grapes, and basically is a mechanical way of trying to imitate the threading. The good news is that this is full of advantages. One of them is that we can actually control the temperature of the tank, which in the traditional way you can't. Obviously, in this process, we don't really need as many people involved, and so that's easier to manage. And this is where we actually produce most of our premium ports. So food threading nowadays will represent about probably 5 to 6% of our port production, and most of our premium port is produced in these high technology processes. So port, as I was telling you, is a fortified wine. The wine is fortified with brandy 3 days after we started crushing the grapes, and port is made in those 3 days. Okay, next slide, please. So back in the days, up until the first dam was built in the River Douro, and that was in the early 60s, a lot of the port was transported to Porto, where I am, and I will explain to you why we bring the wine over here. But all the wine was transported by boat. These are the famous Rebelo boats, which obviously nowadays we don't use, because nowadays all the wine will be transported by trucks. Okay, if you visit Porto or the Douro, you can still see a few Rebelo boats, but nowadays they are mostly used for touristic tours of the river. Okay, but in the old days, this was the way of transporting port by boat for over 100 kilometers all the way down to the coast, to the city of Porto. Next slide, please. Which is this. So here you have a picture of Porto on the other side of the river. Okay, on this side of the river, which is basically where I am, it's another city, fun enough, called Gaia. And these two cities, Porto and Gaia, they face each other, and together, Porto Gaia, Portugal. They are the origin of the name of the country. So this is the oldest, Porto is the oldest urban area of the country. The name of the country comes from here. So, and the picture you see here, it's only about 3 kilometers from the ocean, which stands on the left. So we're very close here to the ocean, the Atlantic. The reason why we bring the port to the Atlantic coast to age is because if we kept the wine in the Douro, as I told you, the summers are really hot. And if you are aging wine, if you have big temperature variation, the wines will age much faster. So with port, we are trying to delay the aging process as much as we can. So the Atlantic coast is ideal because this huge ocean, so between Porto and New York, there's only water, and this big ocean is our air conditioning. So if you come to visit our cellars, you'll see that we have no air conditioning at all. But still the temperature, even in the summer, is kept very, very, very steady, okay? The temperature in Porto is very, very constant. So for instance, Porto stands at the same level as New York. And in New York, in the winter, you have a lot of snow. Here, we have absolutely no snow at all. The temperature throughout the year is very constant. And that is fantastic to age port. So that's the reason why we age most of our port in the coast. Next slide. So this is this is just a picture, a funny picture of the two cities standing in front of each other, both Porto and Gaia. There's plenty of bridges crossing from one side to the other. Some of them very famous. One of them was, for example, built by Eiffel, the same person that built the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Next slide. Okay, this is our cellar, Taylor cellar here. So I'm, only a few meters away from this picture. And when we bring the wine to the coast, we have two ways of aging port in wood. One of them is to age or to keep the port in those big vats like the one you see in the background that takes about 100,000 liters. It's a very, very big vat. And if you keep the port in that vat, basically you will have practically no aging at all, no oxidation. The color will be preserved throughout the time. The second option to age port in wood is actually the small barrels you see there. And that's exactly the opposite. So if you fill those casks, they are 600 liters. If you fill them with port, there will be a very fast aging process happening, a very fast oxidation process. So basically the way we will age port will create all the different styles that we are familiar with. And actually the two ports that we will taste today, one of them, the Taylor Select, was kept for about 3 years in the big vat, and you will see it keeps its dark red color. The other one, our 10-year-old Tawny, has been kept for 10 years in the small barrels. And as you will see, the color, in the beginning, they had the same color. You'll see that after 10 years, the 10-year-old Tawny has a completely different color. The ones that are kept in the big vats will always be called ruby ports because of the color. The ones aged in small barrels are the famous Tawny ports. Next slide. Okay, I won't take a long time here, but this serves two purposes. First, it actually shows you how complex port can be. So there are many different categories of port. We are tasting tonight, we're tasting 2 of them. There are many others, and that will all depend on the casks we choose for the aging and the obviously quality of the wine that we age, and also the time they spend aging in these casks, which can vary a lot. I can tell you that in some of our Tawny casks, we have wines that are well over 100 years old, okay? And in the vats, you have categories that stay there for more than just 3 or 4 years. So it all will depend on how long these wines will be kept in those casks. Then this chart shows you something different, something else as well, which is there is a third way of aging port, which many of you are familiar with, which is bottles. And that's the famous vintage port category. So port can be aged in wood, in either big or small barrels, or it can be aged in bottle, and that's a vintage port. To age port in bottle means that you're aging even slower than in the big vats. So the vintage port aging in bottle is very, 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 very slow, let's say, process. Okay. For the Tawnies, for example, we will have 10-year-old, 20, 30, 40, 50-year-old Tawny, even a new category, very, very old port category, which is over 8 years in cask. For the Ruby aged in the big vats, we have standard Ruby, reserve Ruby, late bottle vintage. Then we also have white port that can also be kept in either one or the other. And so it's a very complex category. Sometimes not always, very easy to understand because it's so complex, but the best way to understand it is to open bottles and drink. Next one. So just a bit of history about Taylor's. Taylor's was established in 1692. It has never left family's hands. So we are a family-owned and managed business, which is quite unique because there's a lot of family-owned companies, as you know, but they are not managed by the family. Here we are entirely managed by the different family members, okay, as a business. So Taylor's started in 1692. Is a company that it's probably one of the oldest still trading companies in the world, and basically obviously very famous for having produced historical ports throughout its history. One of the most famous associations we have, because as a brand we carry the Royal Warrant, is our association with the royal family in the UK. And I just thought that this would be interesting to show you because when King Charles received the president of South Africa, which I think was the first state banquet back in November 22, the port that was chosen, and port is still served in that reception, was Taylor's 1983. So it shows you how historical the brand is in the UK market, of course. But you know, our association with Buckingham is historical and very, very important to us. Funny enough, I don't know if any of you knows why port is used to toast to the monarch in England. So as you probably know, most of the wine drank in Buckingham does not come from Portugal, comes from France. But when you toast the head of state or the monarch, you should not toast with your enemy's wine. So it should not be French. It should be something neutral. And obviously port being from Portugal, and actually England and Portugal having the oldest military alliance in the world. Probably many of you are not familiar with this. And that's a reason why I'm not Spanish, because every time Spain tried to invade us, you have helped us fight Spain. The same with Napoleon. And so that long-lasting association of port with England is very, very important for us. Okay, next slide. And so to finish, just to say that you know, we are very happy. We've been very happy with Co-op to sponsor the possibility. I'm sure that many of you have heard what happened in our country this year. Again, it's becoming an every year history, very unfortunately, because it's very sad. Every year we have a lot of fires in Portugal because the country keeps getting hotter and drier. So the proportion of wildfires just keeps increasing. And so the efforts to replant, reforest are very, very important. And so obviously, together with the Co-op, we have planted over 2,500 trees in an area of the Douro that has suffered one of these fires in the past. And we've planted them with autochthonous varieties, oak, which is one of the key things to do, because a lot of these fires happen because Portugal has planted a lot of eucalyptus throughout the years and pine trees, which burn very quickly, very easily. So this is a very strong and important association we have to make sure that we can reforest our country. Next slide. Very good.
Just before we move on to the tasting, João, would you mind just telling everyone a little bit more about some of the sustainability things that you've worked on and the Porto protocol?
Absolutely. So we have created a charity, let's say an institution that is part of our company, a charity institution which is called the Porto Protocol, because we are very conscious of the need to share the best sustainability practices that many different companies, including ours, but many others around the world do. So instead of each company keeping that as a competitive advantage and almost as a secret and not sharing, we believe that the most important thing is for people to actually share what's being done all over the world. So the Porto Protocol is now made of over 100 different companies from all over the world. And all of us share publicly, not only within the group, but we every year we issue a report publicly with the best practices that go from water management to obviously, you know, waste reduction, etc. You know, and it's very interesting because even being an institution within our company, it actually comes to conclusions that obliges us as a business to also evolve and keep you know, improving in this front. So we don't believe in greenwashing. So we believe that more important than having all different types of certifications, the most important thing is to actually share. I'll give you just one small example. So as a company, as a business, we work in one of the most challenging wine regions on earth, which basically has almost no rain at all. It's very, very dry. And we are a completely 100% dry farming company. We do not irrigate any of our vineyards. We do not use any water from the river to irrigate any of our vineyards. And I can tell you this is quite uncommon in the Douro region. But we make a point of making sure that we only plant our vineyards where there is enough rainwater to irrigate them so that they can survive every year. So we do not use any unnecessary water from the river, only because we want to plant vineyards where they should not be planted anyway. Just to give you a reference, we have less average rainfall in the Douro than in Northern Africa. So according to the EU, we're actually in desert conditions, technically.
Thank you. It's really interesting. I think some of the sustainability work that you've done is so important to highlight, because it's growing more and more in importance to people. And when we're thinking about climate change and the impact that it's having on regions like yours, it's important that we kind of know when we're enjoying a glass of port with our Christmas cheese that we're doing something good as well. So thank you for sharing that. And toasting to the Portuguese, not the French or the Spanish. Good. Fab. Well, we can move on to the tasting, which I'm sure is why everyone is here. So I think it's the ruby first, isn't it? So if you wouldn't mind just talking everyone a little bit through what they're tasting. But actually there was a couple of questions in the chat, which one of them was, what's the best glassware to put your port into? And the other was, what's the best temperature to serve port at? If you wouldn't mind covering that as well.
Two absolutely key questions. So actually, this can be used as not the best practice. This is the classic historical glass of port, which, in our view, this is a technical tasting glass. Was basically the one I could find here. You should use a white wine glass. So please drink port in a proper wine glass. If you think a red wine glass is too big, use a white wine glass, because port needs to be enjoyed, its aromas, the flavors. You need to appreciate the wine, and you can see I keep referring to it as a wine. So it needs to be enjoyed as any other wine that you open. So use a proper wine glass. In terms of temperature, that's absolutely key, because port being a fortified wine, so we used brandy to stop the process, which means port is slightly stronger. So it's between 18 and 20% alcohol. It's also sweet because some of the sugar from the grapes hadn't yet been transformed into alcohol. But because it's stronger in alcohol, you should make sure that port is never served too warm. So when people say room temperature, yes, but please make sure that the room is not 25 degrees. So what I always recommend is a temperature between 16 to 18, which basically means, just put any bottle of port for a few minutes in the fridge. That will bring the temperature down, 10 minutes, and then port is served at the right temperature. If it's a Tawny, so that applies to a wine such as the Taylor Select, a ruby style port. If it's an aged Tawny, I would even challenge you to keep it in the fridge. Drink it chilled. It's absolutely delicious. So any aged Tawny port served chilled in a proper wine glass. I'm sure you will stop asking me for how long can I keep the bottle open, because the bottle will probably only be open for that evening. So.
The best way of doing it. Thank you. So if anyone is trying along with us, we're trying the Taylor Select Ruby Port as our first wine of the evening. So if you could share a little bit more about.
So it's a wine. So you can see its color. Dark red color, so just like the stone, the precious stone, ruby. That's why it's called ruby. And this is kept in those big vats, such the one in the picture. So usually we're talking about vats that have a volume between 50,000 liters all the way up to over 100,000 liters. And what happens is that even if you keep the wine there for 2, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, the wine will never lose its dark red color. And there will be very little impact from the wood, because you have a lot of liquid inside, okay? And so even Select being in that vat for about 3 years, you don't really get a lot of wood impact, a lot of wood elements. Most of what you get is fruit, is the primary flavors of fruit. So basically Select is a fantastic expression of the style of fruit, flavors, aromas that we get by producing port. By the way, a very important thing, we can only produce port with the native Portuguese grape varieties. So the wine you have here was not made using Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot. No, that's forbidden. We can only use the Portuguese grapes, Touriga Nacional, Touriga Franca, Tinta Barroca, which means that the port will always taste differently from all the other red wines you're familiar with, using the international grapes, because the grapes we use here are different. So what we want Select to be is the perfect expression of that fruit. Because it's so fruit driven, it actually leads a lot of people to think that it's very sweet. And being very sweet in its profile, in its style, means that it's a great contrast port. So it's a port that will work very, very well with anything that has absolutely nothing to do with it. Contrast. So when you drink a premium ruby port, you should and you think about pairing, you should always think about contrast. That's why blue cheese works so well. Okay, it's strong cheese. And also, for instance, dark chocolate. The bitterness of dark chocolate also works quite well.
Great, thank you. I don't know if, Sophia, you'd like to talk to us a little bit more about the cheese?
We could just pass on to the next slide. Fabulous. So I actually have our own Co-op Irresistible Roquefort, which you can purchase. It is really delicious, especially if you're a fan of a creamy blue. This is one that we were tasting a little bit of earlier. One of the really interesting things about Roquefort actually is that the origin, so it's closely linked to the Combloux Massif, which basically collapsed about 1 million years ago, and it created a really unique geographical site made up of caves and faults and natural chimneys. And basically back in that time, man basically just learned how to use this space and built the Roquefort maturing caves. And today this is still the process of maturing cheese, and it happens in the Roquefort sur Soulzon. It's still used today. It's really, really a great place to see if you've ever visited the Roquefort region. So the caves are open for the public to uncover these mystical cheese locations. So if you ever are in that region, I definitely recommend getting down there to see it. Roquefort is basically really easily recognised by its ivory colour and its delicate emerald green marbling. Yes, which you can sort of see from here. It's actually made from sheep's milk, which was something that I hadn't realised before I joined as the cheese buyer. And it has a very balanced taste and a melting texture, so it's quite different to Stilton, where Stilton can be quite crumbly. Actually, Roquefort is very creamy and quite soft, actually. I've got a picture, if you look on the bottom left of the slide, that actually has a picture of these caves where Roquefort is matured, and it's used a lot in cooking as well. So obviously it's a great pairing for port, but it's also, you can cook with it or have it on its own or within salads. And our Co-op Roquefort is made the traditional way, and it's made from milk from sheep who are, they're basically raised outdoors whenever the weather permits, because we obviously don't want them to be outside in the cold and rain. And all of the milk from the sheep is collected from the locals in the region, which is a great way to support, you know, the local area. And it's completely natural from a maturing perspective in these cellars. So yeah, I hope that gives a little bit of an insight into Roquefort, and I hope you feel compelled to pick it up if you haven't already, but it is a really great pairing with port.
It's a mainstay on the cheese board we have at home at Christmas, so I'm sure people are enjoying it. I can see a few people saying it's tasting good, so I'm glad to see it. Okay, did anyone have any other thoughts they wanted to share on the port or the cheese before we move on to the next one? I'll give you a couple of minutes. Shopping trip needed. Happy days. Wonderful. Great. Well, we'll move on to the Tawny port next. And this is actually, it's a Co-op Irresistible Tawny port, which actually the label of this, I'm not sure if you can see it, it's quite small on the screen, was actually designed by our members a few years ago. So I don't know if you can see on the label, this is actually supposed to represent the Douro River. I really love this label. I think it's really pretty. And quite simple but effective. Oh yeah, you've got one, got one as well in Portugal. That's good. I'm glad it's coming from the right place. But it's interesting just because it has been a member designed, member co-created product. So it just shows the heritage and the history that our members have got with this product. So if you wouldn't mind leading us through a tasting, that would be wonderful.
Well, yes. So I haven't told you, but I've been taking care of port sales in the UK for almost 20 years now. And when I started port, a lot of people had no idea what aged Tawny was. So that not that long ago. So most people would associate port with a wine of the style that we've just tasted with Select. So nowadays, the aged Tawnies, as we call them, 10-year-old Tawny, 20-year-old Tawny, they have become really, really trendy. So these are now very popular categories. These ports are aged in barrels, so they go through a very fast oxidation process. We lose about 2.5% Angel's share every year. So which means this 10-year-old Tawny has already lost over 25% of its original volume, okay, which is incredible. And you can see that the color immediately starts getting different, getting lost. Starts getting lighter and more brownish. And the other thing is that being a small cask, well, small for port means 600 liters, it is very highly influenced by the oak. So the aged Tawny, a 10-year-old Tawny, becomes, I would almost dare to say, a completely different drink. It becomes full of these dry fruits, vanilla, walnuts. So all of this influence coming from the oak, whilst with Select we had absolutely no oak influence at all. And so we're slightly moving towards a slightly more spirit side, okay? But this is still very early days. The 10-year-old Tawny is still a port full of fruit. And that's actually why so many people love the 10-year-old Tawny category, because yes, you already have a lot of oak influence, but you still have a lot of fruit. So it's a very rich fruit-driven port still. And it's exactly, in terms of pairing, the opposite from what we have described for Select. With a 10-year-old Tawny, you should look for similarities, okay? So anything that reminds you of the wine, anything to do with dry fruits, vanilla, softer, creamier cheeses, that's what works well with aged Tawnies. The other interesting aspect is that this wine is an oxidized wine. So if you do have that challenge of opening a bottle and for how long can I keep it, this will keep for longer because oxygen is not really a big problem for this port. So you can comfortably drink this port over the next 2 or 3 weeks, no problem at all. And the other thing is, as I told you already, it's absolutely delicious served chilled. Try it. Keep it in the fridge. Do not be afraid. Serve it straight from the fridge. And you will understand what I'm saying because it's just simply delicious. We're doing the cheese pairing, but if you ever have the opportunity to do it with, let's say, a very simple pairing such as vanilla ice cream. So if you have this port chilled with vanilla ice cream or with tiramisu or with creme brulee, apple tart, those kind of desserts are absolutely fantastic. The other thing the aged Tawnies are very good at is of having without anything. So they are great digestive, almost kind of drinks. So this is actually both of them. These are fantastic bottles to open when you're enjoying after dinner Netflix, a movie. So I always think, the best occasion for me for port, Christmas is great, Easter is fantastic, etc. But the best occasion, every time after dinner, you are enjoying a movie or a book, port is the most fantastic company for those occasions. Okay, so if you get the aromas of the wine, you will immediately feel the oak influence that I was telling you about. Okay. This is aged in Villanova de Gaia in our cellars, and obviously here we're speeding up the aging process. Okay.
Thank you. So one of the other questions in the chat was around what's the best time in a meal to serve this. So you've suggested after dinner. Would you ever have this as an aperitif or?
Yes. So well, actually, the 10-year-old Tawny category. I am not sure if you're aware of this. So let's take port consumption around the world. Basically, half of people that enjoy port in the world drink it after the meal. And we believe we believe that port is a delicious after the meal drink as a company, as a business. But the reality is the other half of the world drinks port as an aperitif, believe it or not. So if you go to France, you will see that port is in every restaurant's menu, red or white port. And France is still the biggest volume market in the world for port. French will drink port quite frequently before the meal as an aperitif, chilled glass of port as an aperitif. A wine such as the 10-year-old Tawny can be served chilled as a delicious aperitif. It's really good, or with some, almonds, dried fruits. It's, for instance, amazingly with some starters, fats, meat kind of based starters. But to be honest with you and answering your question, the way we see port is being one of the world's best dessert wines, after the meal wine. So port's territory by nature is after the meal. That doesn't mean that you cannot chill a bottle of port and enjoy the sunset, or go to a park and meet with friends in a park and enjoy a bottle of port before dinner. A chilled 10-year-old Tawny, to do that is unforgettable. And we usually say that port is the oil of great conversation. So it's probably also one of the key pairings for port.
Excellent, thank you so much. Should we move on to the cheese pairing with this?
Yes.
This port, if you wouldn't mind moving on, Terry.
I have my cheese prop, but actually, if you look at the photo in the bottom, our Pioneer Crunch is actually what is recommended to pair with this port. It is an absolutely deliciously creamy cheddar. It's crafted in the heartland of Cheddarland, down near Somerset. It's a multi-award-winning cheese, and it has been aged for 18 months under wood, so it is really, really delicious, and a lot of love goes into creating it. Our very strategic supplier, Wykes, actually supply this for us, where we have a long-term partnership with them, and it's made to their family recipe, which they perfected almost a century ago. From a taste perspective, it's very like a creamy, complex flavour with nutty tones, and I would say it's really ideal for a cheese board, but also for cooking. It really elevates any dish that you could add it to. I mean, I feel like cheese does that anyway, but definitely if you were to try a cheddar, this is the one to try. I definitely don't think you'll regret it, and over Christmas there'll be lots of extra space for this cheddar, so keep an eye out for it.
This cheddar in particular, it's got delicious little crunchy salt crystals in it. It's so savoury, and there's just something about it that
and it's not salt actually. That's an interesting fact. It's calcium lactate is added during the cheese making process. So when the milk is kind of put into the vats, they add calcium lactate, which makes it a little bit different, and gives it a really,
the crunch is just
iconic.
really interesting. It's nice. Fab.
That saltiness of the cheese works fantastically well with the sweetness of the port. It's when we eat salted caramel ice cream. That combination is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, the sweet and the salty are the perfect partners, I think. Fab. Well, I hope everyone has enjoyed the tasting. I think it's probably time to open it up for questions, if anyone has got any that we haven't answered yet. Obviously, we'd be very happy to answer them. But in the meantime, whilst we're just waiting for a few to come through, you mentioned earlier about the Touriga Nacional grape. Are there any other grape varieties that are used commonly within ports that you think
as you rightly said, up to 80 different ones. Our head winemaker, David Guimarães, is very protective of not focusing only on 4 or 5. So we continue to use many different ones in field blends. So we try to preserve a lot of the historical traditions of planting grapes in the Douro. So you'll see a lot of field blends, mixed varieties planted in our vineyards. But the most famous ones will be Nacional, Touriga Franca, Tinta Barroca, Tinto Cão, Sousão, Tinta Roriz, which is the only international grape varietal. It's a Tempranillo in Spain. All the other ones are completely autochthonous grape varieties. But we as a company, we try to preserve the way and the style port has had for many, many centuries, which is very much based on planting all these different varieties mixed, okay? The same goes for whites. Actually, white grape varieties, we have up to 100, more than 100 different ones. So the white grape varieties will be Viosinho, Rabigato. When you taste white port, port will not be made with Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, etc.
I think it was Sarah who told me that one of her favourite names of a grape variety was, I think it's Dog Strangler, which I just think is absolutely mad as a translation. I think there's probably some weird and wonderful weird and wonderful things in your field. Thank you for that. There's a few questions coming through. So there was one about whether there's a benefit to decanting port and at what point you should decant port.
Only when you see a normal wine cork in a bottle of port, so that's vintage port, you need to decant. Every time you see a stopper cork like this, you don't really need to decant. It's ready to be enjoyed, and so you don't really need to decant, and there is no added value. I mean, this could bring us to a more, a bigger discussion. I personally don't really see the value of decanting wines that carry a bar top cork. They are ready to be enjoyed at their best. When it comes to vintage ports that will have a wine cork, there you should decant, definitely, which is quite easy to do. You can very easily check on 2 or 3 different options online to decant vintage. And vintage port should be decanted at least half an hour before you actually drink it.
Great, thank you. And there was a question that came in, I've just lost it, from Keris, which asks, should you ever add ice to port?
Very good. Yes, we do, and we're not ashamed of it. We mostly do it with a white port. So a good glass of white port, not the small glasses, but a good white wine glass full of white port with a few ice cubes on it, it's delicious. You obviously can also chill the bottle and serve white port chilled. It's very, very good, but you can no problem about putting some ice on it. So like any other drink, you should drink port the way it brings you more pleasure and enjoyment. So port always works well at lower temperatures. The really tough territory for port is when the wine is too warm. So if you feel that the wine is too warm, just putting a couple of ice cubes on it, if it helps, do it, no problem.
And I assume that covers the next question that's come in, which is it okay to mix it with anything, something like lemonade or tonic or?
Yeah, so we have a growing in popularity cocktail right now because of all the different visitors coming to Portugal, which is port and tonic. And port and tonic should be made with white port and very simple to do. You can go up to 50-50, white port, tonic water, lots of ice in the glass, a slice of lemon, squash the lemon juice inside. If you have a mint leaf, perfect, and mix. If you don't have the mint, don't worry. And it's delicious. It's very refreshing, and it's growing in popularity. So we see, for instance, our sales of white port growing all over the world, driven by visitors coming to Portugal, enjoying the cocktail, and going back home and getting white port bottles. So definitely, I would say port and tonic is a very easy to make, delicious cocktail.
Great, thank you. And then earlier we heard a little bit from you about the fortification process and the brandy that you use to fortify it with. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you select that spirit, and how important it is for the overall taste and profile of the finished product?
It's very, very important. So the basic, let's say, the most important aspect about that brandy, first of all, it has to be brandy. And by the way, we can only buy brandy from approved suppliers by the Portuguese government. So it's not, we cannot buy brandy anywhere, only from approved suppliers. It has to be 77%, cannot be any other strength, and it has to be neutral. No color, no flavor, no aromas, okay? And all the brandy lots that we buy are tasted by the Port Wine Institute, the Portuguese government. So to make sure that there is no added flavor, no added color. But even in that neutrality, there are different grades of quality for brandy. And so the high quality brandy you might want to use is very, very critical to produce your premium ports. So definitely the brandy is of very, very high importance. If you come to our company today, if you go to the tasting room, David and his team, you'll see hundreds of port bottles, okay? If you come here in April, you'll see hundreds of brandy bottles. So we are both port and brandy tasters. So the importance of brandy is clear.
Great, thank you very much. And then there was probably time for one final one, which was a question about some flooding a few years ago. So someone asked, I saw that the Douro River had some bad flooding a few years back, and were your cellars impacted by that? And if so, have you got plans around climate change, flood defences? What's your thinking for the future?
So when I was a kid in Porto, we knew for a fact that every year we would have floods. So basically the river level in Porto would go to above and flood the city. Today that's very rare because there are 5 dams built on the Portuguese Douro River. There are many more in the Spanish side because the Douro River starts almost in the Pyrenees. And so with all these dams, nowadays it's easier to control the flood level across the different regions, okay? And because since we've joined the EU, we have a much better water management relationship with Spain. Basically, it means that nowadays, every year the river almost gets to the flooding level, but now it's very rare for it to happen. If it does happen, nowadays it doesn't reach our cellars level. But you're right, in the past, so before the dams, it was possible. And so there are very famous years in history where the river reached very high levels and flooded some of our cellars. Nowadays, that's very rare. So the most important thing there is the water management being done between Portugal and Spain with the dams. And so the dams have that, they have a lot of probably negative impact in terms of environment, but they have that advantage of allowing a better water management.
Great, thank you so much. I think that's probably about all we've got time for, unless anyone wants to hang around after we do the prize draw and have one final few question for the team. But Terry, if we can hand over to you for the bit that everyone has really been waiting for. I hate to say it, I fear that this might be why people are still on the call. So over to you, Terry.
Cheers. Well, first off, thank you all for everything tonight. I've learned so much. It's been incredible. I think a lot of people in the chat have really appreciated it as well. So big thank you for giving up your time tonight to help talk to us about these fantastic ports and cheeses. It's been great. So we did say we were going to be doing a prize draw, and Ellie did tell us what it was with the big magnum of Taylor's and then the cheese board from Sophia. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to have 2 winners. Ellie's going to ask one question, and the first to answer in the chat, the quickest correct answer is going to win. And then we're going to do it. Then we're going to do that again, but with Sophia. So it'll be a port question and a cheese question. So Ellie, I'm going to come to you for your port question first.
Okay, we're going to do fastest correct answer, or if no one gets it right, it's going to be the closest answer. How many UNESCO World Heritage Sites are there linked to wine and wine regions? Oh, John.
There we go. John Culver. First one in.
Sentence.
And there we go. Everyone's flooding in now.
Fair enough.
Wow.
Well done. Everyone was listening. My God. Fine. Over to Sophia.
That is very impressive. So a cheesy question from me. Can anyone name the interesting place that Roquefort is matured in? Oh yeah.
Ooh, there's a few good
yeah.
right answers. I'm not
Yeah.
sure who was fastest. Alice, I think.
Alice, yes. Congratulations on your cheese board.
There will be if you could stay on the call afterwards, and Terry will get your addresses, both of our winners, and we'll get the magnum of port and a cheese board out to you. Very, very fastest fingers.
Yeah.
You should all be on quiz shows.
For that, for Alice and for, let me scroll and find his name again, John. Congratulations both. I've just dropped my email in the chat. If you can both drop me an email following this call, we'll pick up with you separately to organise getting these prizes out to you, if that's okay. Brill. So yeah, brill. That was a really quick fire round. Like they come absolutely flooding in really quickly. That was amazing, and shows that a lot of people were paying attention the whole way through, which is what we like. Brill. So before we wrap up, we do have another wine event that's going to be happening before the end of the year. It's not open for booking yet, but it will be very shortly. We're going to be looking at our Co-op Irresistible Le Pionnier Champagne in December, and that's going to be on Wednesday the 18th. So keep an eye out for more. Keep an eye out on the Co-op app, on your Co-op emails, because we'll be hearing more about that very shortly. If we do have any more final questions and you want to pop your hand up, I can see someone does have their hand up actually. So I will just bring you in, Sheila. I'm going to allow you to unmute so you can ask your question. We'll probably hang around until about 8:10, and then we'll have to call it. But Sheila, you should now be able to come off mute. Maybe not.
Well, whilst we're just
there we go.
Whilst we're just unmuting Sheila, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Taylor's and to Joao in particular for hosting us this evening and for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and experience of such a beautiful region with us. So thank you very much. I hope you can see the chat that everyone is showing you a lot of love. So thank you very much.
Thank you everyone, and thank you for the opportunity you gave us to wave our flag, our passion, our love for Porto.
Sheila, I did see you manage to get off mute, but you're back on. Do you want to try one more time? And if it doesn't work, then we will just leave it. Well, okay, no worries. Right, what I'm going to do then, we're going to end it here. So a massive thank you for everyone for joining tonight. I did copy and paste some links before with all the links to the products that we've covered tonight. But I will just paste them back in the chat so everyone can see them in case you want to make a note of anything. So that's gone back in there. And yeah, other than that, just thank you for coming. On the first link where it's got the YouTube playlist, the recording from tonight will be available on that link, hopefully by Monday, maybe tomorrow, we'll see. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and we'll hope to see you at a future event. Cheers, thanks everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much.